Let me read to you from the 18th chapter of 1 Samuel, please, verses 1 through 5. After David had finished talking with Saul, Jonathan became one in spirit with David, and he loved him as himself. From that day, Saul kept David with him and did not let him return to his father's house. And Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as himself. Jonathan took the robe that he was wearing and gave it to David, along with the tunic, even his sword and his bow and his belt. Let me pause right here for a moment. Saul wanted so much to have David around because David was such a wonderful hero. And so he kept David there with him, wouldn't let him go back to his home. But David knew the danger that he was in. Whatever Saul sent him to do, David did successfully. That Saul gave him a high rank in the army. This pleased all the people and Saul's officers. When the men were returning home after David had killed the Philistine, the women came out of the towns of Israel and came to meet King Saul with singing and dancing and joyful songs. They sang with tambourines and flutes. They danced and sang, "Saul has slain his thousands, David his tens of thousands." Now, what does that have to do with the topic of behaving oneself wisely? Well, just this. After this incident that was so very telling in the story of David and Saul, it says over and over, about 3 or 4 times in the different places, David behaved himself wisely. He behaved himself wisely. You know, when I'm under stress, and all of us are under stress at one time or another, I, a lot of times, behave myself very foolishly. If someone were seeking my life or something like that, I may do some very, very foolish things. David was just a young man, and 3 times it says he behaved himself wisely. Well, it paid off. But then it brings up the question also about exactly what is wisdom. Now, I'm not going to read all of the passages tonight that I'm going to refer to, but the Old Testament says more about wisdom than just about any other part of the entire Old Testament, the entire Bible. The 3rd chapter of the book of James, get my pages here. The 3rd chapter of the book of James tells us something about what wisdom is. It talks about wisdom of the earth and wisdom of heaven. Who is wise and understanding among you? Let him show it by his good life, by his deeds done in humility that come from wisdom. But if you harbor bitter envy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast about it or deny the truth. Such wisdom does not come down from heaven, but it's earthly, it's unspiritual, it's devilish. For where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you find disorder and every evil practice. Now, I want you to see the contrast that he draws here. But the wisdom that comes from heaven is first pure. Then it's peace-loving. It's considerate. It's submissive. It's full of mercy, good fruits, impartial and sincere. Peacemakers who sow in peace raise a harvest of righteousness. I just tell you, I just really like that. I really like that passage because it not only describes what real wisdom is in terms that we can all understand a whole lot better, but it gives us kind of a foundation to build on. So let's look at some of the things that the Bible says, Old Testament and New Testament, about wisdom. How would you define wisdom? I've heard it defined in reference to knowledge sometimes, but I know some people, and you do too, who have a lot of knowledge, but they act very foolishly. It seemed like that their knowledge did not lend itself to wisdom at all. The Old Testament says more about wisdom than you find anywhere in the entire Bible, and it's found mostly in the Psalms and the Proverbs. And so in Psalm 111, the writer there talks about wisdom in reference to our respect for God, our respect for His Word, and things like this. And so as I was thinking along this line, I thought, well, we can't really be very wise and not respect God. And of course, we're saying, well, we all respect God. Yes, we probably all respect God. But we're living in an age when God is not respected in a lot of realms. All you need to do is look at some of the comments that come in the after the articles that you find on the internet. I enjoy reading the comments a lot of times more than the article because it's surprising how people can take any article that you read and they can weave through that article things that they want to present, and so much of the time it's anti-God, anti-Christ, anti-Christianity. Well, we can't have wisdom without respecting God. And Psalms 111 emphasizes that general aspect of things, that general idea. Another thing is that we can't have wisdom without respecting people. It's not a matter of what color your skin is. It isn't a matter of how much money you have in the bank. It isn't a matter of who your ancestors were. No, my ancestor did not come over on the Mayflower or anything like this. It has to do with what's on the inside of me that gives me the power to respect people, whoever they might be. You know, there are so many times when I think of myself, I respect the people, number one, that I like. I respect the people who like me. I respect the people who are very, very smart. I don't respect the people who I differ with a whole lot. I don't respect people that I don't like. And the first thing you know, I find out that I've got about as many disrespect as I do respect. You know, one of the things that Jesus taught us was that no matter what a person believes, we differ in some of our beliefs. No matter what a person wants, we differ in the things that we want. But you know, husbands and wives are that way. And in my own experience, I've seen homes that have fallen apart simply because they allowed their differences to destroy their respect for each other. We can't allow that. We can't allow that in human relationships. We can't allow that in the business world. We can't allow that anywhere. Remember something. I even hate to describe it this way, but it's the best way that I know. The gutter rat. The fellow who is down and out. The man who is what we think of as the scum of the earth. Let me tell you something about that guy. He's created in the image of God. Why is it wrong for me to call a person a fool? Jesus says, don't call anyone a fool. Don't say raka to anybody. You know what those words really meant in the original language, the original idea? It meant you are a worthless, stupid blockhead. That's about the best way I can describe it. The emphasis there is on worthless in the original language. Worthless. In contrast to this, I remember a cartoon. It shows a little boy, and he's just a little kid, and he says, I know I'm worth something because God don't make no junk. Maybe you've seen that little cartoon. Well, that really is the idea. Now, what does this have to do with wisdom? It has this to do with it, that you and I need to learn to show respect for every person God has created, because that person belongs to God. That person is made in God's image. And a mark of wisdom is to be able to respect every person, whoever that person might be. Well, David and Solomon were both men of great wisdom. Both of them made some very terrible mistakes. I think, for example, of David, a man of great power, a man of great prestige, a very intelligent, very insightful man. All during his relationship to Saul and the stresses, it says over and over, he behaved himself wisely. But then he began losing respect for God's laws. He began losing respect for the husband of another woman. And the first thing you know, he finds himself doing one of the most foolish things that he could possibly do, by having a sexual affair with Bathsheba. You see, I can be very, very wise and do some very foolish things. David is a good example of that. And when I was growing up, there was a preacher. As a matter of fact, he's the fellow that got me started preaching. So I had great love and affection for him and his family. He had almost a slogan. I heard him say it so many times. Speaking of Solomon, the wisest man who ever lived became the world's greatest fool. Well, why? Because Solomon failed to respect the Word of God. What causes a man to do some of these things? I wrote down a quotation from Adam Clarke, great commentator. He lived about the time of the Protestant Reformation, the 1600s, 1620, around there. He said in reference to Psalm 111, "He who feared the Lord departs from evil. He who lives in sin neither fears God nor is wise." I thought that was a pretty good statement. The person who continues in sin doesn't fear God, and neither is he wise. Well, the wise man receives the commandments of God. I hear some people say sometimes, well, this is not a necessary commandment. Then other people will say, well, times have changed so much. We don't think of morality. We don't think of ethics. We don't think of this or that in the same way. One of the funny, this was not funny. I told Nathan about this at lunchtime. I was just flipping through the channels the other day, and I came upon something. I just said, The Talk. And I didn't know what it was. It was a group of ladies. I think it's kind of like The View or something like that. And you know what they were talking about? They were talking about whether or not Obama had lied when he made the statements that he did that have been so controversial. And they were talking about, well, was it just a fib or was it a real lie? And then they said, well, if I did this, that would be just a fib. But if I did that, it'd be a lie. And then one of them said, no, I would consider that a lie. We make some very foolish distinctions here that God really doesn't make. Why? Because we don't respect the word of the Lord. Someone calls my home and the telephone rings, and I say to one of my children, now, if that's so-and-so, tell them I'm not here. I want the child to say, Mommy, where are you? Daddy, where are you? I thought you were here. Well, we learn to lie in ways like that. Foolish behavior. What is wise behavior? What is wisdom anyway? I don't know how to define this. I never have read what, to me anyway, was a satisfactory explanation of it. But in looking at the book of Proverbs, it seems to me that Solomon always links good behavior, wise behavior, with discipline. When I am not disciplined, I do foolish things. When I am disciplined, I am more likely to do wiser things. So it made me think, well, the statement earlier, in the first chapter of the book of Proverbs, the statement is made, the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. What does he mean, fear of God? Well, yes, I think there's a certain thing about being afraid. But the basic idea is that we have to learn to respect God before we can gain this heavenly wisdom that James talked about. Over in Corinthians, very interesting first 4 chapters of Corinthians, of 1 Corinthians, because Paul, particularly in the first 2 chapters, Paul talks about the wisdom of men. And Paul was writing to Corinth, right there, 50 miles or so away from the great city of Athens. And the philosophers and all, a background of philosophers, and that's just the way Athens was recognized. Well, in all of this, with all of the wisdom of the Athenian philosophers, Paul says, I'm going to paraphrase this, and it's not going to come out just right, okay? Paul said, God in his most foolish moment is wiser than men at their wisest moment. Now, he didn't put it just exactly that way. He said, the foolishness of God is wiser than men, and the wisdom of God is foolish for men. You see, we can't come to a conclusion about forgiveness of sins, for example, simply by human wisdom or by the wisdom of men. James talks about heavenly wisdom. Notice what he says about it. First of all, he says heavenly wisdom is pure. It's pure. It's pure in your speech. It's pure in your actions. It's pure in your thoughts. Jesus made a statement in the Beatitude, blessed are the pure in heart. It's an interesting idea here because the word pure there carries with it the idea of that which is unpolluted. And this can apply to the idea of sincerity. It can apply to the idea of pure motives in what a person does. And so Jesus said, blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. And James says that heavenly wisdom is pure. The one who is wise then inspects his motives, inspects his sincerity, and he tries to build around that. The next thing he says is that it's gentle. You remember again in the Beatitude, Jesus said, blessed are the meek. I've asked so many times, what is a meek person? Well, some of us have the idea a meek person is very quiet. He doesn't say anything, kind of sits in the corner and minds his own business. He's never aggressive or anything like that. He is kind of, he's milquetoast. He kind of sits with his hands folded, and he's not heard, he's not seen very much. That's a meek person. No, that's a shy person. That's not a meek person. A meek person, instead, this word means a person who does not retaliate. It means a person who is kind and gentle. It means a person who does not lose his temper. It's very close, although it's not exactly the same, it's very close to the idea of humility. Humility gives birth to meekness, it seems. Well, the wisdom from above is gentle, Paul says, James says. The next thing is, it says, it's full of mercy. Full of mercy. I wonder about myself a lot of times, whether or not I am a merciful person. Frankly, it kind of bothers me sometimes. I don't minister to people who need mercy. Not very much. I mean, that's not a primary thing. Shakespeare understood something about mercy that we as Christians need to understand. I can't quote the whole thing, but here part of the way he introduced it. He said, "The quality of mercy is not strained. It falls gently from the heaven like the dew." He said, it's twice blessed. It blesses him that gives and him that receives. And I've just always thought, as I've read that through the years, I've just thought, Shakespeare had a really fine insight into the idea of mercy. Service is one of the things that we need to learn as Christians. I am greatly blessed when I'm able to serve. And I'm not talking about me as a person. I'm talking about people. We are greatly blessed when we learn to serve. We are also blessing other people by offering them the service that they need. And so this whole idea of mercy, compassion, I like the word compassion because it's a Latin word that the word passion is a word that means your feelings. Your feelings. Good feelings or bad feelings, but your feelings. And the word com, C-O-M, is a Latin word that means with. And so the idea is that I feel with you. I feel with you. A friend of mine lost his wife. I would say his name happened to be Jack also. But he lost his wife. She was a fine lady. I knew her. And I was talking to him one night, and I was expressing my own condolence, my own compassion toward him. And he said, "Jack, that means a lot to me. I know exactly what you're talking about, because I know that you know what it's like." Although we can't all have the same experiences, we can nevertheless, we can feel with one another. I heard a fellow say one time, "I don't know how you feel because I've never experienced it, but I want you to know that I want to share your sorrow." That's feeling together. That's a mark of a person's wisdom, James says, full of mercy. And then he says, without hypocrisy or sincere. Without hypocrisy or sincere. The word hypocrite used to be a wonderful word. It was used, I've mentioned this to you before, it was used by the ancient Greeks to say a play actor. Here is a person who wears a mask, and he is acting like someone that he really is not. Well, that was a hypocrite. Someone who is acting like someone else, someone that he is not. And so this word degenerated to the point that it came to mean someone who is acting like in life like he's good when really inside he's evil. And so James tells us that the person is that the heavenly wisdom found in a person is that wisdom which is from above and is pure, is without hypocrisy. Wisdom causes us to seek good rather than evil. Wisdom causes us to fear evil, abhor the very appearance of evil, Paul says. A wise man not only fears evil, but he departs from it. James talks about draw near unto God, and he will draw near to you. Somehow I know that works beautifully. I find that the greater my devotion to God, as experienced in such things as sharing my life with others, worshiping with others, praying with others, such things as sharing some of my resources with others. Whatever, financial resources, whatever it might be. It's such a wonderful thing to be able to give to someone else who really is in need. And so this is a part of drawing near to God. And God draws near to you. Oh, there's so many other things that could be said about this whole thing of wisdom. Way back over in the Old Testament, we find an expression: the one who wins souls is wise. The one who wins souls is wise. Very important idea. What is wise behavior? Oh, it's pretty hard to define. It's pretty hard to describe. And yet, here are some components of it. Here are some elements of it that when we see these elements together, they begin falling into place like the pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. And it makes a beautiful, beautiful scene. When we get those pieces together and we see the picture that is being presented, we see a picture of what Christ was like himself. And so there's a great deal of emphasis in the Bible on the idea of being Christ-like and therefore being a very wise person. We're going to stand now and sing an invitation song. If you are in any way subject to the invitation of Christ, we invite you to respond. Let's stand and sing, please.